Hello. In this series on Mourning the Dead Dream, we have been talking about five different persons, and we are about to go into the sixth and final person in the list. As you may recall, we've been talking about Lorenzo Charles, Jim Valvano, and Armen Gilliam, and these three people are sport-related, and they all passed away at the age of 47, coincidentally. These two, the first one and the third name here, these two persons passed away recently, almost within a week, if I'm not mistaken, of each other. And Jim Valvano, he passed away some time ago, but he is strongly related to Lorenzo Charles, as we saw before. So these three people are 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 a figure of the male ministry endowment dying and not being manifested in this generation. And we also talked about two political figures, Bobby Jindal and Michele Bachmann, rather briefly. And they're a figure of the male, the two female ministries that were left without a male counterpart in order to be manifested properly in these latter days. And so they speak about a state of weakness, a fifth seal weakness that was made, in a sense, permanent when it comes to this generation, and without the ability to going into the sixth seal stage of strength and manifestation and vindicating vengeance. So the remnant have been trapped in this fifth seal state of weakness and of, to a certain extent, impotence in the sense of not being able to get out of that situation, at least for this generation. And the final person we have to talk about is Casey Anthony. And we were meaning to talk about her immediately after we recorded the last video where we talked about Michele Bachmann, but the Lord would not allow it, and as we meditated on what we had to say, what God wanted us to say about Casey Anthony, the series of news events that began to happen, and I believe in my heart that the Lord allowed these events to happen in the interim between the time when we talked about Michele Bachmann and now that we have to talk about Casey Anthony, because there are spiritual lessons that can be discerned from each of these events. So in a sense, they're kind of an interlude. These news events are an interlude to the tragedy that's represented in the name Casey Anthony. As you can see, we are seeing these people in a positive light. These people, in a sense, represent spiritual heroes. So you have five spiritual heroes here and one villain. In other words, the opposite of a hero here. So we have five, and we were unable to go into six. And there's a spiritual six in a good sense. In other words, instead of having six good people, we're having five good people and one evil person. And that's a figure of how the church, the American church in this generation, was unable to transition from five to six, from the state of ministerial grace represented by five to the state of weakness, of recognizing weakness and completely surrendering in green horse sacrifice. That is what this generation wasn't able to do. It wasn't able to enter into the fullness of the green horse stage, so it never made the transition from 5 to 6 that we talk about on the website. So that's why you have 5 good people and then an evil person instead of 5 good persons and then a sixth person. And that also talks about the inability of going from the 5th seal into the 6th seal in a proper way, at least when it comes to this generation. And the news events that happened, that have been happening in the interim, are a figure of that tragedy, or an interlude that leads up to that tragedy. So one of the first things that happened between the last recording and this one was the U.S. Japan final in the Women's World Cup, the quote-unquote soccer World Cup, which I prefer to call football World Cup. That's how that sport is called around the world, except in America. And I prefer the name football. So when I'm saying football, at least over the next few minutes, if you're in America, please remember that we're talking about what is called soccer in America, but we're going to call it football the way it should be called. Now, as some of you may know, the U.S. Women's soccer or football team was playing in Germany in the 2011 World Cup, and they were playing against Brazil in the quarterfinals. And I remember that that Sunday, that particular Sunday, I was doing something on the computer, and for some reason I had the television on, but it was on mute. And then I decided to flip through the channels, and for some reason I landed on a channel that I barely watch, and that's when I saw that they were showing the game between Brazil and the U.S. And exactly when I turned to that channel, they were about to do the first penalty kick. As some of you may know, that was a very interesting game. It was tied at 2 at the end of regulation, and then they went into overtime, and nobody scored. And after that, they had to go to the penalty shootout to see who would qualify for the next phase and who would get eliminated. And as I saw the beginning of the penalty shootout on the screen, I just sensed in my spirit that there was spiritual relevance to this. So I began to watch it, and I felt the desire to pray for the U.S. Women's team, and I felt this anointing that there was a prophetic purpose in the U.S. defeating Brazil in that game. So as I had my heart in prayer, you could say the U.S. Players made kicked their penalty shots, and they were all successful. All 5 of the U.S. players made their penalty kicks, and I remember that there was one Brazilian woman who was approaching the spot to make her kick, and I sensed in my spirit that she was the one appointed to miss her shot, and lo and behold, she missed her shot, and she was the only one who missed out of the 10 players who tried their penalty kicks. 9 of them succeeded, and she was the only one who didn't. And because of that, the U.S. won the game. And then the commentators began to talk about what had just happened, what I hadn't seen before the penalty shootouts, because I was not watching that game. And it turned out to be one of the most dramatic victories in World Cup history. It turns out that the U.S., if I'm not mistaken, was ahead 1-0 at the very beginning. Then Brazil tied it up 1-1, and then they went ahead 2-1. And there was this controversial play, and the referee red carded one of the U.S. players, so the U.S. was left with 10 players on the pitch, starting around minute 70. So they finished out, I believe, the last 20 minutes of regulation with 1 player less than the Brazilians. And they were down 2-1. So they were down by 1 goal and with 1 less player. So it looked pretty grim for the U.S. team. And then around they reached the 90 minutes of regulation time, and as you may know, in football, they always add what they call the stoppage time, because unlike American sports, football has a running clock that doesn't stop. It's not possession. The clock doesn't stop on possessions or things like that. So even if the ball is out of bounds, or there's an incident on the pitch, the clock just keeps running. And because of that, referees always do like an estimate of how much extra time they need to recover at the end of the game. That's what they call stoppage time. So they generally add 1 or 2 minutes. And I think that in this case, they were adding like between 2 or 3 minutes. The thing is that 2 minutes into stoppage time, I mean, the game was practically over, and then suddenly something happened. The U.S. was about to lose 2-1. They were past regulation, and 2 minutes, I believe, into stoppage time when a play happened. And I'm not very good at describing play, so let me just draw it up quickly. It's not that complicated, but there's a reason why I want to share a certain detail about the play. We draw a very basic drawing here of the pitch. You have the football pitch here with the circle at the half, and you have the box, or what I prefer to call the area, the penalty area, or the penalty box here on each side. And the U.S. had the ball, and they were trying to score. They were playing one man down, or one woman down in this case. And there was this player right here. She had the ball. She was dribbling with the ball, and she was around this position. And she then decided to lob a pass into the area here, and then there was this American player here, and she saw the ball coming, and she leapt up, and she headed the ball, and the ball went into the net, and they tied it up. So the thing is that the game was over practically, and at the very last minute, just before they would be eliminated, the U.S. team was able to score on this header as a result of this lob pass from left to right, and they were able to go into overtime. And the U.S. team was able to withstand the Brazilian attack, and they ended overtime still tied at 2. And that's when they went into the shootout, and they won the game there. So it was a very dramatic victory. And as they talked about, as the commentators were describing everything that had happened, how dramatic the game had been, they kept pointing to the 1999 final, because it was 12 years to the day, to the exact day, when the U.S. women's team played against China here in Pasadena at the Rose Bowl. And the U.S. beat China in penalty shootouts as well, and won their second World Cup title that year, and it was in Pasadena. And they just kept referring to Pasadena and to that final, and I began to sense in my spirit that there was a correlation, that it was not a coincidence that 12 years to the day that match had been played here in Pasadena. And that, in a sense, the drama was being relived 12 years later. And now, the reason why I found this place so meaningful, and why I felt in my spirit that there was a spiritual connection to everything we've been talking about, is because this is almost exactly the way Lorenzo Charles and NC State won that game on that final shot. Those of you who may want to watch it on YouTube, you will see that in that basketball game, Derek Wittenberg of NC State was right around the same relative position here on the court, and he also lobbed a pass. He tried to shoot towards the basket, but his shot was short. And then Lorenzo Charles received the ball on the right side of the basket, which corresponds to this player who was on the right side of the goal. And he took the ball in midair and then dunked it. And that's how NC State won the game at the last minute. And I felt in my spirit that as the Lord had us talking about NC State and Lorenzo Charles, that something was released into the spirit realm, especially after the fact that Lorenzo Charles had passed away. Something was released into the spirit realm that enabled this same scenario to happen all over again. But this time with the U.S. women's football team playing against Brazil. The exact same play, and I just felt the same anointing, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was some person out there who was praying for the U.S. women's team and who was praying with the same faith that I had been praying, the same type of faith that I had been praying in 1983, which is 28 years ago, during the NC State final game against Houston. And so something was released, and somebody was reapplying that faith into this game, and that's how the U.S. was so able to miraculously win the game, win the match against Brazil. Now, after that, the U.S. went into the semifinals, and they beat France rather handily, 3-1. And I was pretty happy when that happened. And then I began to hope for the U.S. Winning the final match against whomever it might have been, and I wanted to see that happen as a figure, or my hope was that would be a figure of what is coming, that the next generation will do something good. And that's how I began to envision it as a good sign for America in the short or medium term. So I was kind of in a certain sense of expectation about that final match. And it turns out that Japan beat Sweden, I believe, in the other semifinal, and they ended up in the final match against the U.S. And as I was waiting for that match, I one day was looking at the Yahoo page, and I saw the headline that said that the U.S. Women's team wanted a special guest in the final match. And I began to wonder, who would they be asking to attend the match to watch them? And when I clicked on the link, I found out, sadly enough, that the guest they were calling for was the bastard in the White House. So they wanted Barack Hussein Obama to attend the game, and several players were quoted as longing for him to be there to cheer them on. When I saw that, I realized there was something very wrong, and they had just tainted their own victory. They had just cursed themselves by drawing this evil man into the mix, and it kind of turned me off from them. And then I began to long for them to lose. My heart I felt a certain repudiation against them. And as I read the story, I found out that the same thing had happened with the U.S. men's team when they played in South Africa in the World Cup last year. That they wanted to make it, I believe, to the semifinals, and if they made it to the semifinals, they wanted Barack Hussein Obama, the bastard in the White House, to be there to cheer them on. So they were doing the same kind of invite, and that's why they ended up losing to Ghana, and they were not able to go very far in that tournament. So there was this curse that they set upon themselves, because they were giving this victory as a tribute to the bastard, to Satan, and to the spirit of Antichrist that operates in that man. So whatever good God had done up until then through them, they threw it away when they consecrated it to him. And that's why I lost all interest. I didn't even want to watch the match. And I, in a sense, cursed them, spiritually cursed them, and because that curse was coming from God towards them. They had drawn that curse. As Proverbs says, a curse does not come just for no good reason at all. It's always drawn by something, and they drew it unto themselves by inviting this man. And since there are a remnant out there who is spiritually attentive, that remnant released the judgment into their lives, and that's why they were cursed from the beginning. And so I didn't even watch the game. I think I found out the next day or that night out of curiosity. I just wanted to know if the U.S. had lost that game. And I was surprised to find out that they were ahead 1-0 in that game. Like at the 69th minute, the U.S. scored, and they were leading 1-0. And then kind of the opposite. It was kind of a mirror image of what they had done to Brazil. Now Japan was doing it to them. And one thing that's also worth mentioning is that when they were being interviewed after the game, I was kind of saddened in my heart, because they kept saying this is proof of the American spirit and American determination, and what Americans can do when they're determined, and this and that and the other. And I didn't hear that spirit of humility, of gratefulness, no mention of God, no mention of a higher being. And when I saw that, I said, oh, this is not a good sign, but I just kept hoping that we could ignore that and put it under the blanket of ignorance, of spiritual ignorance, that they did not understand what was happening, but that anyway God would operate through them. But it became evident that there was a spirit of pride operating in them. They didn't realize that it had been God's mercy upon them, a miracle from above that had propelled them past Brazil. So that's why what God had done for them, He began to do against them. The exact same things, only in reverse, just to prove that He is the one who had blessed them, and not them blessing themselves. And so that's why, like in that final match against Japan, the U.S. scored first, so they were up 1-0, and then Japan on the 81st minute, like 9 minutes before the end. So the U.S. had the lead late in the game, 69th minute. Imagine you have a 0-0 draw, and you have this battle going on, and then suddenly the U.S. scores with just 20 minutes left. It would be devastating to any team, but Japan just kept fighting, and 9 minutes before the end, Japan tied it up, just like the U.S. had tied against Brazil before the end of regulation. So they went into overtime, and the U.S. went ahead 2-1. And then Japan, they were about to lose again. The overtime is 30 minutes long, so they had until minute 120 to tie it up. And at minute 117, Japan tied it up. So God was doing the opposite of what He had done in the U.S.-Brazil game, and Japan forced the shootout, the penalty shootout, miraculously at just 3 minutes before the end of overtime. They tied up the game after being down. And just to make it more interesting, there was a Japanese player who was red carded in the last minute of overtime, at minute 120. And God allowed that because the U.S. had a player red carded in the U.S.-Brazil game, and they played one person short from then on. So God, as a prophetic sign, allowed the same thing to happen in the U.S.-Japan game, and the one Japanese player was ejected towards the end of overtime. So there was this mirror image going on. And then in the penalty kicks, that U.S. team that was so solid, that the one that I saw and that I was praying for in the U.S.-Brazil game, that didn't miss a single penalty shot, that showed confidence and determination shot after shot, that team just fell apart in the penalty shootout. And I learned that 3 out of 4 kicks were missed by the U.S. and Japan made 3 out of 4. And so they won the penalty shootout 3-1 because the U.S. only made 1 out of their 4 shots. So this 3 out of 4 was prevalent in the penalty shootouts, and it was God's way of emphasizing that the same thing that we have talked about in many of the postings, that missing quarter that this American generation was unable to provide to enable God's revival. So there was this 1/4 missing. America only gave 3/4 of itself spiritually, and that's why it fell short. And that 3/4 was provided by a very small remnant, and that the missing quarter that had to be provided by somebody else was not provided by those who had to. So it was there was a spiritual message going on there, emphasizing how the U.S. Had missed its calling, and the fact that Japan won the World Cup is even more a confirmation, as we have shared on the website. If you have visited the website in recent months, you'll have noticed that we talked about Japan extensively in one of the postings, and we saw how they were related to the spirit of Moab, the spirit of the people who never admit that they are wrong. And that spirit was beginning to get manifested around the early March, and that's why you had the earthquake in Japan around that time, because it was a judgment of God against the Moabite spirit that never admits it's wrong. So the fact that Japan defeated the U.S. is a figure of how the U.S. lost its revival, because it was never willing to admit that it had fundamental issues to deal with. And we're not talking about liberals. I mean, they are wrong. They don't even need to be considered. They are demented and in a spirit of falsehood. We're talking about the conservatives and about the Christians who think that their philosophy and their understanding is complete and totally acceptable to God, and they're not willing to understand that there are things within their philosophy and understanding that are incomplete, and because of that are abominable to God and need to be transformed. But since they are unwilling to admit that they're wrong, that's why God had to reject this generation and move away from them and not manifest His glory in these days. So that's why Japan, who represents the Moabite spirit in this context, defeated the U.S. team, which was so confident about winning. And the other thing that was interesting to my heart was that the U.S. Women's football team had won the 1991 and the 1999 World Cups. So they had already won 2 World Cups. This was their 3rd final, and they failed to win this 3rd game, or this 3rd match. So that's 2 out of 3. And as we share on the website, this talks about the body and the soul, but not the spirit. In other words, somebody who loves God with their mind and with their emotions, but not with their heart. And we talk about that in postings such as the one about what is a false prophet. And that's another figure of what happens spiritually to America. Now, as I was reading the details about how the U.S. had won the game, had lost the game to Japan for the glory of God because they had cursed themselves. I was reading the Reuters report on that game, on that match, and I noticed that the report mentioned Barack Hussein Obama, and it was kind of interesting to me. What in the world does this bastard have to do with a final match? I mean, if we're talking about sport, a sporting story, a football story, what in the world does Barack Hussein Obama have to do with anything? And the fact that they mentioned him, and they said that Barack Obama had tweeted, if I'm not mistaken, that he was going to watch the final because he had heard about the invitation that the women's team had given him, and so that's why he posted on Twitter that he was going to watch that final match on television. So, and the Reuters reporter found it relevant to mention that, to mention this irrelevant human being in this news story, and that is a figure of how his spiritual influence was inserted into this match, and that's what cursed the American team in that final. And so we're seeing here a figure of God's rejection of America, and we share all of this in the context of this play, which points to Lorenzo Charles. So in a sense, God is saying that what God was going to do through that faith that was manifested in the Lorenzo Charles and NC State victory, that will not reach its final conclusion because America has allowed itself to get contaminated spiritually and has accepted things that God has rejected. So it's a figure of the Lorenzo Charles dream dying. That's why the U.S. didn't win. And I found it interesting that as I was walking around Pasadena in the news, the newspaper headlines that I saw, one was on the Pasadena Star, and it said, U.S. dream denied. And the same headline was in another newspaper, the San Gabriel Valley Tribune. It said the U.S. dream denied, and it showed a picture of the U.S. women's players all sad and discouraged after they had lost the match. And it was interesting to me that said U.S. dream denied, because this is a series, this video series is about mourning the dead dream. Lorenzo Charles's death is a figure of the dream of the river of God dying in this generation, and that's why that headline said U.S. dream denied. So there's no coincidence in all of that, and the fact that the Lord placed those headlines so that I here in Pasadena would watch them is a figure of the fact that this is not a coincidence, that all of this is spiritually related. Here in the city where the U.S. had won their second World Cup, here that dream, the headline was U.S. dream denied, that the fact that the U.S. was not able to enter into the third level. And so that's the spiritual meaning behind that headline story. And now, the other interesting thing that caught my attention was something that happened today, that I read about today, and some of you may know about it. This morning when I went to the Yahoo homepage, I was kind of stunned when I saw the headline that said that Amy Winehouse had died. And at first I thought, could that be a mistake? And I clicked on it and I read the story, and I was saddened to find out that she had died. It saddened me basically because I do not follow most of the music scene of today's modern singers. The talent is not that good anymore. That's my personal belief. Especially in the last 5-6 years, I've felt this big decline in talent, and most of the music that's being produced is very very mundane, and it's very lacking in depth. There are a few interesting prophetic songs out there, but for the most part, I feel that the quality has gone down a great deal, and I know that's spiritually related to the spiritual decline that America has gone through, especially because it rejected God's visitation. But but it drew my attention because Amy Winehouse is a British singer, and if it had been an American singer, I don't think I would have been as interested. At the beginning of the year, the year 2000, 2001, 2002, I felt that God was beginning to bring out certain talented female British singers, and I felt this spiritual attachment to that move, and that's why it kind of saddened me to hear that Amy Winehouse had passed away, and she died at the age of 27. And as you may recall, we recorded a video on Joplin, the Joplin tornado, and we talked about Janis Joplin and those people who died at the age of 27, if you may recall. And 27 is a figure of those who fall one short of perfection, because 28 is the number of perfection or completion. So 27 is a person who's gone a long way and stopped one short of fulfilling their calling or their goal, or God's goal for them. And it was interesting as I was reading the story. I hadn't made the connection with all the other people we talked about that had died at the age of 27, the famous singers like Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix and so forth. So it was kind of like the Lord had to use something to remind me that, and to make me realize that there was a spiritual connection. And I'll go quickly here to I saved that page exactly as it was at the moment when I was reading it, and the reason why I saved it is because I wanted to save the comments that were present exactly at that moment. As you know, people add comments, so this comment will probably will not be at the top if you go look up this story right now. And I'm going to read to you exactly the comment that was at the top at the moment when God prompted me to enter that page. It was a comment by a user that said, "It's just sad Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, Amy Winehouse, the best of the best gone too soon, lots of talent. Jimmy, play her a song, rest in peace." And that was the comment. But the Lord allowed this comment to appear at the very top to make me realize, oh, this has to do with the people we were talking about in the Janis, in the Joplin tornado video. So that kind of struck my heart. And as I began to read about this singer Amy Winehouse, I did not know this, that her first breakout album, the one that made her famous around the world, was an album called Back to Black. And as you may recall, in the Joplin video, we kept talking about how God was indicting America for staying at black and not making the full migration into green. And we talked about Joplin being between two counties, and I can't remember the name of the two counties. One was Newton, if I'm not mistaken. And we were talking about how I think the other county was Jasmine County. We were talking about how Newton County represents the black horse stage, and Jasmine County represented the green horse stage, and how America kind of got caught up in between and didn't make the full transition. It got caught between black and green and had what we call on the website a Shittim regression. It got to the edge of the Jordan, and then it started pulling back. So it was going back towards black. So it's not a coincidence that a woman, Amy Winehouse, who died at 27, which points to everything we talked about in the Joplin video, would have her first breakout album as Back to Black. In other words, somebody who was going green and then decided to go back to black. And that's why her life was so tumultuous and so difficult. And as I was sharing with you a moment ago, one of the reasons why this story impacted my heart was because I I felt this spiritual connection to some of the British female singers that began to surface as the 21st century um, came into being. Amy Winehouse was one of these famous British women. The other one would be, for example, would be Dido, which many of you may have heard. And there's a lot of prophetic anointing in the songs that she sings. And the other singer that would come to my mind would be a singer called Gem. Some of you may have heard about her or not. And one of the songs that the Lord would draw my attention to a great deal was a song that she wrote called They. And allow me to just read you some of the lyrics. I'm reading from the lorama.net website. It says, who made up all the rules? We follow them like fools. Believe them to be true. Don't care to think them through. And I'm sorry, so sorry, I'm sorry it's like this. I'm sorry, so sorry, I'm sorry we do this. And then it says, and it's ironic too, because what we tend to do is act on what they say, and then it is that way. And then it says something very interesting. Who are they, and where are they, and how can they possibly know all this? Who are they, and where are they, and how can they possibly know all this? And then it says, do you see what I see? Why do we live like this? Is it because it's true that ignorance is bliss? And then it repeats some of the same lines, and then the song ends. So it's a song about somebody who is beginning to question the traditional paradigms that it has been taught, that he or she has been taught, and wondering, who are they, these people who are telling me that things are this way, and I just follow them, I just accept them unconditionally, and then it is that way because I adopted them, and I just accept them as undeniable truths. So then she begins to ask, who are they, where are they, how can they possibly know all this? In other words, how can they be so all-wise and full of wisdom and truth that they can know these things so absolutely, and that we have to accept them without questioning? That is what happened to the conservative Christian church in America. She had all these paradigms, and she continues to operate in these traditions and these mindsets that prevented her from going fractal green, as we share constantly on the website. And so they never asked the question that Jem was asking, and I just felt in my spirit, as I heard about Amy Winehouse, I began to think about Dido and Jem as well, and I know that I know in my spirit that there's a spiritual connection there. That Jem represents the type of people who did ask the questions that would allow them to go from black to green, and Amy Winehouse represents those who began to go back to black. Interesting. It's also interesting to note that Jem, the singer Jem, she studied law at Sussex University in the UK, and she did graduate, despite the fact that she invested a great deal of time as a DJ. She started to invest a lot of effort into her musical career, but she also wanted to study law, and she did graduate. So we're not talking about a person, a drug-taking, crazy person who doesn't think or anything. We're talking about a thinking individual who went to law school in the UK, and the fact that she studied law was like a confirmation to my spirit, because it had to do exactly with the things that the Lord has had us thinking about, and we will share about that things that have to do with law, with regard to the Casey Anthony case. It's not a coincidence. I had no idea that this singer had studied law. I mean, it would have been the last thing my natural mind would have expected. And that song, They, came from an album called Finally Woken, that came out in 2003, 2004, finally woken. In other words, this dormant church that finally wakes up and will receive the glow of the glory of God. Remember what Paul says in Ephesians when it talks about the slumbering church and calling it to wake up from its slumber so that the glory of God may shine upon it. And so it's not a coincidence that that song "They" is in there, and it's a song that kind of points to a transition from black to green. It can also point to a transition from red to black to a certain extent, but in this context, I believe in my heart that it points to the transition from black to green. And her name is Jem, and Joplin was unable to make the transition, spiritually speaking, of course, from Newton County into Jasmine County. Jasmine is a precious stone, a gem. So all of this is related. It's not a coincidence that this young woman lost her life at the age of 27 around this time. As we have been talking about people dying. So the Joplin tornado stirred up something. It caused us to recall, the remnant believers around the world to recall, okay, Joplin and the people who died at age 27 and what they represent. And now you have this young woman, talented woman, unfortunately losing her life. And at the time of this recording, I believe that the cause of death remains unknown, but she has passed away at the young age of 27. So we have two news stories: the U.S.-Japan final, which points to Lorenzo Charles, and we have this story of Amy Winehouse, which points to what we were saying about Joplin in a video that's not that does not belong to this series of videos on mourning the dead dream, but is spiritually related because it talks about a death, and now we're mourning the death of Amy Winehouse, just like we have been mourning the death of the prophetic dream. Now, besides that, a third news event that angered me greatly was what a comedian, well, if you can call him a comedian, he is more like the village idiot. And I'm not saying this in the flesh, but I'm saying these things when I use the word bastard and when I use the word idiot. I'm not using them in a casual or fleshly way. I'm using them in the spirit. Those of you who visit the website know that when we talk about bastard, we generally always add a link that explains what that word means in Scripture, and we always point to a posting where we talk about Hebrews 12:9, which illustrates that a bastard is a person who does not accept fatherly corrections, and that's why he can't be treated like a son by God the Father, because he only kind of forgets about the people who hate his judgments. So he sees them as bastards because they are not willing to be molded by his nature, by his judgments and his nature. So that's what a bastard is, a person who rejects fatherly correction, and that's why he walks away from God the Father and is not molded into his likeness. So that's what bastard means. And when we say idiot, we're saying the word idiotes, the Greek word, which comes from another word, idios, which means pertaining to self. So an idiot, spiritually speaking, is a person who is self-absorbed, who just sees the world around himself or herself. And that's what makes him or her an idiot, not the lack of intellect. It's the lack of the inability to see beyond their own personal interests and agendas, and who can't think about anybody but themselves. That is idiocy. And when I just said the village idiot, it's not just the term village. in Scripture points to two spirits, as we share on the website, the Perizzite spirit and the Hivite spirit. The Perizzite spirit is the poor villager. The Hivite spirit is the blaspheming rich kid villager spirit. And Bill Maher has both, even though I dare say he has more of the Hivite spirit. And that spirit makes people blind. Blindness is related, when it's used in a negative sense, is related to the Perizzite and the Hivite spirits. Those are the spirits of blindness. And the Hivite spirit causes people to say blasphemous things, they are people who have no reverence for what is holy. And all this is related to what we have had to share about Michele Bachmann and what we'll be sharing regarding Casey Anthony. Now, this village idiot called Bill Maher was on his show, which I don't know how many people watch, but he was on a show, and he had these guests, fellow idiots on his show, and one of them was, I believe, a homosexual, and they were just going on and on about Michele Bachmann. And they started making jokes about, how they would like to see Michele Bachmann raped, and they were just going on and on, using a lot of offensive, foul language. So if you're offended when I use the word bastard and village idiot, I don't think you would tolerate what Bill Maher had to say. So if you're offended by me, I expect you to be truly offended by what Bill Maher said. And if you're not offended by him, and you're offended by the words I'm saying, then God's judgment shall be upon you for daring to judge the righteous and condemn the righteous and letting go of the unrighteousness of those who hate God and who hate everything you stand for if you are a so-called Christian. Now, they were talking about raping Michele Bachmann, and then the homosexual began to make jokes about raping the husband of Michele Bachmann. They began to talk about the husband, and in a derogatory sense, as if in a sense he was her servant or something like that. And then they went on to visualize and kind of enjoy the idea of having her husband, Michele Bachmann's husband, raped. That's what the homosexual was fantasizing about. And Bill Maher and all the other bastards were all just rejoicing in the very thought of Michele Bachmann getting raped. Now, there's a spiritual connection to everything we're going to say, especially with regard to Casey Anthony, so please bear that in mind as we continue later on, but that is a relevant spiritual event. And I just want to issue this word of judgment. I curse Bill Maher and his family, and I curse everyone related to him. May death and destruction fall upon him. May judgments and sadness and disease befall his family and befall him, and may he die a tragic death. Now, when I say family, that's one thing that I've been asked about before when I issue words like that in the spirit. People say, why are you judging or condemning the family? What does the family have to do with anything? And when I use the word family, I'm not referring to literal biological connections, even though it does include that if the shoe fits. But a family refers to people who are compatible with your soul, who support you and who enable you, who have affinity with what you are and what you represent. That's family. That's why remember when Jesus was preaching and his biological mother and brothers were out there and they wanted to talk to him, then Jesus said, they said to him, your family wants to talk to you. And he didn't, as we say constantly on the website, he didn't say, oh, okay, I'm going to interrupt what I'm doing right now and go talk to my family to to emphasize the importance of family values in the Christian culture, and how important it is to focus on the family. He didn't do that. On the contrary, he kind of pushed them off and said, my family, my mother and my brother are those, and my sister are those who do the will of my Father in heaven. So he said, the fact that they're biological family doesn't mean anything. If they are here interrupting me and they're trying to get me away from what the Father wants me to do, at that moment they're not my family. So it doesn't matter if they're biologically related to me. I am not going to submit to them and place family over God's will. And the lack of focus on the family that Jesus had can also be seen when there was this young man who said to Jesus, Jesus said to him, "Follow me," and then he said, "Allow me to go bury my father." And then Jesus said, "Let the dead bury the dead." If Jesus had been so focused on the family, just like Mr. Dobson and all these other matriarchal preachers emphasized, then he would have said, "Oh, well done. You should honor your father and your mother, just like the Bible says, and you should go and be with your family and be there when your father passes away and bury him. And then, after all of that is done, then come and follow me." He didn't take that attitude. So Mr. Dobson and Jesus would not get along very well if they got together one day in the Spirit. I mean, they can get along to a certain level, but then Jesus would start going beyond a level comfortable to the Dobsons of the matriarchal church. And then they would stop following him. And then they would start proving that they're not Jesus' spiritual family at that level. And if you don't like this, well, then that means that we're not family either. And it also means that you're probably not as related to the Lord Jesus as you think. And this may sound arrogant, but I'm saying it to you in the Spirit in the hopes that you will get close to God instead of walking away from Him. To walk in the Spirit requires a certain willingness to let go of soul attachments and to judge things at a different level. And if you, fellow believer, brother and sister in Christ, are not willing to do that, and you're walking away from your calling, that's why it's important to share this. You are a spirit being. You are a son and daughter of God, and you have a mighty calling. And if you're not willing to understand what we're sharing right now, then you're going to lose that calling. So what would you prefer? That I and others like us not say anything so that we may sound politically correct and sound acceptable to you? Or would you prefer that we take the risk of sounding arrogant or sounding judgmental in the hopes that at some point you will allow the judgments of God to seep into your mind and your understanding, and you will be able to walk in the Spirit and get away from soulishness? Remember, whoever doesn't accept the judgments of God, whoever doesn't believe in the God of judgments, is a bastard in God's eyes at the end. That's why at the end of Hebrews 12, the chapter that talks about what a bastard is in God's eyes, you see at the end that it says, let's walk with fear and reverence because God is consuming fire. It doesn't say God is gooey kindness and gentleness. It says God is consuming fire. You have to accept that. That's why God sometimes says things that sound harsh and unacceptable to the soul. But if you're willing to accept them and embrace them, then you're going to be molded by God, and then you're going to manifest His nature, and then you're going to be approved and loved by Him, and you're going to bless the lives of others. So now the final news story that we wanted to share about, and that kind of ends our interlude before we talk about Casey Anthony, is the Oslo massacre that happened recently, as you may have heard on the news. I personally, to be honest with you, have not caught myself up on the details of what happened. I just know that somebody apparently started shooting at a lot of people, a lot of young people, and they were coming back from a youth camp or something, and a lot of people died. And it was kind of interesting to me when I saw that news story the next morning, because the night before, I remember that I had seen something on television, not a news story or anything, just a regular television program, and they mentioned Helsinki. And Helsinki, the word, just got stuck in my mind. And I went out to eat something shortly after that. And as I was sitting there to eat, I was just eating, and then I began to think about Helsinki again. And for some reason, God just clouded my understanding, because I would dare say, I hope I'm not wrong, but I would dare say that 5 out of 6 times, if you asked me where Helsinki is, I would say Finland. But for some reason, I was sitting there and I was thinking, Helsinki, Helsinki. Isn't that in Sweden? And I said, no, that's not right. But for some reason, I kept thinking about Finland, but I couldn't quite place it in Finland, and I kept moving Helsinki all the way over to Sweden. And eventually I understood, okay, Helsinki goes with Finland. And then I said, okay, what are the 3 big cities in the 3 Scandinavian countries? You know, the ones, when you have Europe, as you may know, you have the UK around here, and you have continental Europe below here, and then you have 3. I'm terrible at drawing. Please, I apologize for that. But you have like 3 nations here to the north of the continental European landmass, and these 3 countries are these 3 kind of long countries here that are right next to the UK, separated by the sea, are Sweden, Norway, and Finland. Finland is the one here closest to Russia. So Helsinki is in Finland, and I began to think, okay, the big city in Finland, okay, Helsinki. The big city in Sweden, or the capital, Stockholm, okay. And then I said, the big city in Norway, Oslo. And I just got stuck at Oslo, and I began to say, Oslo, that's a funny word. And I just kept repeating it. You know, I don't know if that happens to you sometimes, that a word that you've heard many times suddenly becomes weird, and you start pronouncing it as if you were hearing it for the first time. So I kept saying, Oslo, Oslo, that's a funny name. And that's how it ended. And then I continued to eat and forgot about it. But that, you know, that thinking about Oslo was just in my heart. And then the next morning, the news story about Oslo and the Oslo massacre. And why is this relevant? As I was hearing about this story, I was listening to a radio show that morning as I was working, and the commentator said, the host said that Oslo was the place where Barack Obama had received his Nobel Peace Prize. And I said, oh, interesting. And the other thing that I was thinking about when I was eating and thinking about Oslo, as I got stuck at Oslo, is okay, Oslo goes with Norway, and Norway goes with the black horse stagnation, as we have shared on the website many times, and there's actually even a posting called Norway, if I'm not mistaken, where we talk about the spiritual meaning behind Norway, when we go into detail about the history of Norway and how it represents a nation that got stuck at black. So, you know, Amy Winehouse just died, and she became famous for her album Back to Black. And you have the Oslo massacre happening within almost 1 or 2 days of each other. And in this Oslo massacre, a lot of young people got killed. So it's a figure of how the spiritual future of a nation gets destroyed when it gets stuck in the black horse stage. And many times you seal your fate in the black horse stage when you accept the bastard spirit of Korah, as represented in the flesh in Barack Hussein Obama. And when Oslo, Norway said to Barack Obama, come and we want to bless you with this award, just like the U.S. women's team said, come Barack Obama, we want to bless you with a World Cup victory, then they brought a curse upon themselves. So it's not a coincidence that everything that Barack Obama touches turns to excrement. When he said that in the NCAA tournament, he did his brackets and he put the number one team of each region in the Final Four. When I heard that, I began to pray in my heart, and I prayed, Lord, let all the big seeds in that tournament fall. And as you may know, in that NCAA tournament, those of you who follow that tournament, no number one seed made it to the Final Four, and I think the biggest seed was a number 2 or number 3 seed, and then you had these low seeds that made it miraculously into this very unlikely Final Four that happened this year. I generally, ever since the mid-'80s, I stopped following the NCAA tournament. But this year, when I heard that the bastard had foretold that the top seed of each region would make it to the Final Four, I knew it in my heart. God was telling me, pray against that. So everything he foretells or that he touches turns to excrement. And when he got involved in the U.S. Women's football team, he turned that into excrement. Now that he touched Oslo, now we have the Oslo massacre happening exactly around the time of Amy Winehouse's death, which is not a coincidence. It's God saying, okay, Amy Winehouse going back to black. It's somebody who steps away from entering into the fullness of the green horse stage and begins to accept the bastard spirit, just like what America did. America began to retreat. We had the 4-year delay that we described on the website between 2005 and 2009, and just as America came out of that delay, then it sealed its fate when it elected Barack Hussein Obama into the White House. And that's when it just became permanently stuck at black, and it was cursed by God. This generation, in that sense, has been cursed by God. That's why you have the economic collapse, and then we have the stagnation, and now we have the 14 and going on $15 trillion debt, and the total devastation that we're seeing, and we're seeing the future of the American economy being threatened on a permanent basis, the future generations not being able possibly to enjoy the blessings that previous American generations have enjoyed. All of this has come because this generation was cursed by God, especially when it sealed its fate, electing a man who represents the opposite of everything the green horse remnant represents. That's when they got stuck. They became an Oslo. America became an Oslo. In that sense, getting stuck at black and embracing Barack Obama, and now we have the consequences. And Barack Obama is a political figure, but he represents many things in the spirit realm. So it's more than just electing a bastard president. It's more than that. It's accepting a certain mindset and a certain spirit. And as we'll see when we start talking about Casey Anthony, many of the things that led to that verdict of not guilty are related to how Barack Obama got elected president, quote unquote, of the United States of America.